In the dusty archives of a forgotten library in Barbados, there lies a journal entry dated 1905. The handwriting is shaky, desperate. "I have nothing left," it reads. "My family believes I am mad. I speak to invisible forces and claim dominion over circumstances that mock me daily. Yet tonight I discovered something that will either prove my insanity or transform my world forever." 2 words, just 2 words that carry within them the power to reshape reality itself. The man who wrote these words would later become one of the most influential mystics of the modern age, teaching sold-out audiences in New York's grandest theaters about the mechanics of manifestation. But on that humid Caribbean night in 1905, he was penniless, alone, and facing a choice that would determine not just his fate, but the fate of thousands who would later hear his message. The journal continues, "I understand now why the ancients guarded this knowledge so carefully. It is not because it is complex, quite the opposite. It is because it is so simple that it threatens the very foundations upon which our world is built. If every person knew what I know tonight, if every soul realized the creative power sleeping within their own consciousness, the entire structure of human civilization would crumble and rebuild itself in a single generation. This is not a story about positive thinking or wishful hoping. This is about a fundamental law of existence that operates whether you believe in it or not, whether you understand it or not, and whether you use it consciously or unconsciously. The wealthy know this law intimately, though they may not speak of it in mystical terms. The poor violate it constantly, though they blame their circumstances on everything except their own assumptions about reality. The 2 words that changed everything for that desperate man in Barbados are the same 2 words that billionaire, every influential leader, every person who has ever risen from nothing to everything has used, though most have used them without conscious awareness of their power. These words are not magical incantations. They are the fundamental creative principle of consciousness itself, the very mechanism by which your inner world becomes your outer world. But before we unveil these words and explore their transformative power, we must first understand why this knowledge has been hidden from you, why it has been wrapped in complex philosophies and mystical traditions, and why the very structure of modern society depends upon your ignorance of this simple truth. The thread of this knowledge weaves through every major spiritual tradition that has ever existed on earth. In ancient Egypt, the initiates of the mystery schools spoke of Nukpunuk, I am that I am. The Hebrew Kabbalists understood Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh as the creative name of God, the principle by which divine consciousness manifests reality. The Hindu Vedantists taught Tat Tvam Asi, thou art that, recognizing that individual consciousness and universal consciousness are one and the same creative force. These weren't mere philosophical concepts debated in ivory towers. The wealthy don't become successful because they dress well, live in nice neighborhoods, and associate with other successful people. They dress well, live in nice neighborhoods, and associate with other successful people because they have assumed the identity of a successful person, and successful people naturally do these things. This is the secret that the wealthy don't even know they possess. They use I am statements unconsciously but consistently to maintain their wealth consciousness. They don't say I am trying to be successful. They say I am successful. They don't say I hope this works out. They say I am blessed. They don't say, I can't afford this. They say, I choose not to buy this, or this is not a priority for me right now. Their assumptions about money are completely different from the assumptions held by most people. They assume money is abundant, available, and flowing to them naturally. They assume they create value and deserve to be compensated generously for that value. They assume financial problems are temporary inconveniences rather than permanent limitations. These assumptions are so deeply ingrained in their consciousness that they don't even recognize them as assumptions. To them, these beliefs feel like facts, like natural laws, like the way things simply are. And because they feel like facts, they create factual results in the external world. The tragedy is that most people could develop the same assumptions, could adopt the same identity, could create the same results, but they have been conditioned to believe that wealth consciousness is somehow immoral, unrealistic, or impossible for ordinary people. They have been taught to see the wealthy as different, special, or lucky, when the only real difference is in the assumptions they hold about themselves in reality. The principles we have explored are not merely theoretical constructs or philosophical ideas. They are practical laws that operate with mathematical precision in the lives of those who understand and apply them. Throughout history, there have been countless individuals who discovered this truth and used it to transform their circumstances in ways that seemed impossible to outside observers. Consider the case of a young woman in Detroit during the Great Depression. She was a single mother, working in a factory for barely enough money to feed her children. Every night she would sit in her small apartment and say, "I am prosperous," while feeling the reality of that statement in her body. She didn't just repeat the words, she entered into the feeling of prosperity, the sense of abundance, the consciousness of wealth. Within 6 months, she had been promoted to supervisor. Within a year, she had started her own small business. Within 5 years, she owned a chain of successful shops throughout the Midwest. What made this transformation possible was not luck, not connections, not even hard work, though she certainly worked hard. What made it possible was her unwavering assumption that prosperity was her natural state, regardless of what her current circumstances seemed to be telling her. She used the creative power of I am to assume a state of consciousness that inevitably manifested as external prosperity. The mechanics of her transformation followed the same pattern that governs every successful manifestation. First, she identified the state of consciousness she desired to experience, prosperity. Then she assumed that state by declaring, "I am prosperous," and feeling the truth of that declaration in her body. She maintained this assumption despite contrary evidence from her senses, despite the opinions of others, despite the apparent impossibility of her situation. As she persisted in this assumption, her thoughts began to align with prosperity consciousness. She started noticing opportunities that had always been there, but that she had been blind to when she was assuming poverty. Her emotions began to align with her assumption. Instead of feeling anxious about money, she felt confident and expectant. Her behaviors began to align with her assumption. She started making decisions from a place of abundance rather than scarcity. Most importantly, her identity began to shift. She no longer saw herself as a poor woman trying to escape poverty. She saw herself as a prosperous woman whose prosperity was temporarily hidden by circumstances. This shift in identity was the key to her transformation, because identity is the foundation from which all thoughts, emotions, and behaviors arise. Another remarkable case involves a man who was diagnosed with a terminal illness and given 3 months to live. Instead of accepting this diagnosis as his fate, he began to assume perfect health. Every morning he would look in the mirror and say, "I am perfectly healthy," while feeling the vitality and strength of perfect health flowing through his body. He didn't deny his symptoms, he simply refused to accept them as permanent realities. Within weeks, his symptoms began to diminish. Within months, he was healthier than he had been in years. His doctors called it a miracle, but he understood it as the natural result of assuming a state of consciousness and maintaining that assumption until it manifested as external reality. He had used the creative power of I am to override his apparent physical limitations and create a new reality from his consciousness. The pattern is always the same. Identify the desired state, assume that state through I am declarations combined with the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Persist in that assumption regardless of contrary evidence, and watch as external reality reorganizes itself to match the internal assumption. These transformations appear miraculous only to those who don't understand the principles involved. To those who understand that consciousness is the creative power of existence, these results are as natural and predictable as the sunrise. The law of assumption operates whether you believe in it or not, whether you understand it or not, and whether you use it consciously or unconsciously. The difference between those who achieve extraordinary results and those who remain trapped in limitation is not talent, luck, or external circumstances. The difference is in their willingness to assume states of consciousness that their current circumstances seem to contradict. They are willing to feel rich when they appear poor, to feel healthy when they appear sick, to feel successful when they appear to be failing. This willingness to assume the state of the wish fulfilled regardless of appearances is what separates the conscious creators from the unconscious masses. It requires a fundamental shift in your understanding of causation, recognizing that the internal world of consciousness is the cause, and the external world of circumstances is the effect, not the other way around. The method for using I am to create any desired reality is both simple and profound. It begins with the recognition that you are not a victim of circumstances, but the creator of circumstances. You are not at the mercy of external forces, but the director of external forces. You are not limited by what appears to be possible, but only by what you assume to be possible. The first step is to identify the specific state of consciousness you wish to experience. Don't focus on the external things you want. Focus on the internal state you want to feel. If you want wealth, don't focus on money. Focus on the feeling of abundance, security, and freedom that wealth represents. If you want love, don't focus on finding the right person. Focus on the feeling of being loved, cherished, and valued. The second step is to construct I am statements that capture the essence of your desired state. I am abundantly supplied with everything I need. I am deeply loved and appreciated. I am healthy, vital, and strong. I am successful in everything I undertake. These statements should feel natural and believable to you, even if your current circumstances seem to contradict them. The third step is the most crucial. You must enter into the feeling of these statements. Hence being true. This is not intellectual belief or positive thinking. This is an actual shift in your emotional and physical state. When you say, I am wealthy, you must feel the relaxation, the confidence, the sense of security that comes with knowing you are financially secure. When you say, I am loved, you must feel the warmth, the appreciation, the sense of being valued that comes with being truly loved. The fourth step is to maintain this assumption consistently, regardless of what your senses tell you, regardless of what others say, regardless of how impossible it may seem. This is where most people fail. They assume the desired state for a few minutes or a few days, but then they allow contrary evidence to convince them that their assumption was wrong. The truth is that external circumstances are always the last thing to change. Your thoughts change first, then your emotions, then your behaviors, then your circumstances. If you abandon your assumption at the first sign of difficulty, you will never experience the manifestation of your desire. The fifth step is to live from your assumption rather than toward it. This means making decisions, taking actions, and responding to situations as if your assumption were already a fact. If you have assumed I am prosperous, then you must think, feel, and act as a prosperous person would think, feel, and act. This doesn't mean being irresponsible with money. It means operating from a consciousness of abundance rather than scarcity. This method requires a complete reversal of the way most people approach change. Instead of trying to change your circumstances in order to feel better, you change your consciousness in order to create better circumstances. Instead of waiting for evidence that your desire is possible, you assume it is already accomplished and let the evidence follow your assumption. The power of this method lies in its simplicity and its universality. It works for anyone, regardless of their background, education, or current circumstances. It works for any desire, whether material, emotional, physical, or spiritual. It works because it is based on the fundamental creative principle of consciousness itself. But using this method requires courage, the courage to assume states of consciousness that your current circumstances seem to contradict. It requires faith, not blind faith, but the faith that comes from understanding the creative power of consciousness. It requires persistence, the willingness to maintain your assumption even when external evidence suggests you are wrong. Most importantly, it requires the recognition that you are not a separate individual trying to manipulate external forces, but consciousness itself expressing through the appearance of individuality. When you truly understand that you are the creative power of existence, experiencing itself through the limitation of personal identity, you realize that there is nothing you cannot assume into being. The transformation of your life through the conscious use of I am is not just a personal achievement, it is a revolutionary act that challenges the fundamental assumptions upon which modern society is built. When you prove to yourself that consciousness creates reality, you become a threat to every system that depends upon convincing people they are powerless victims of circumstances. This is why the knowledge of conscious creation has been suppressed throughout history. This is why the simple truth of I am has been hidden behind complex philosophies and mystical traditions. This is why the masses are systematically conditioned to assume states of limitation and scarcity. The recognition of your creative power is the most revolutionary force in human history. When even a small percentage of people begin to use their consciousness deliberately to create abundance instead of scarcity, success instead of failure, health instead of sickness, the entire structure of human civilization will be forced to evolve. The systems that depend upon human limitation will become obsolete. The institutions that profit from human suffering will lose their power. The hierarchies that maintain themselves through the ignorance of the masses will crumble. This is not a distant utopian dream. This is the inevitable result of consciousness awakening to its own creative power. Every person who learns to use I am consciously becomes a catalyst for the transformation of human civilization. Every individual who proves that consciousness creates reality becomes a living demonstration of human potential. But this transformation must begin with you. You cannot wait for others to awaken before you claim your own creative power. You cannot postpone your own manifestation until the world becomes more enlightened. You must assume the state of consciousness you desire to experience right now, in this moment, regardless of what your current circumstances seem to be telling you. The choice before you is simple but profound. You can continue to use your consciousness unconsciously, creating more of the same limitations and struggles you have always experienced, or you can begin to use your consciousness deliberately, creating the life you truly desire to live. If you choose the path of conscious creation, you must be prepared for the responsibility that comes with this power. You can no longer blame your circumstances on external forces. You can no longer see yourself as a victim of fate or chance or other people's actions. You must accept that you are the creator of your own experience and that everything in your life exists because you have assumed it into being. This responsibility is not a burden, it is the ultimate freedom. When you realize that you are the God of your own experience, you also realize that you have the power to change that experience in any way you choose. You are not limited by your past, your genetics, your education, your circumstances, or any other external factor. You are limited only by your assumptions about what is possible for you. The two words that changed everything for that desperate man in Barbados in 1905 are the same two words that can change everything for you today. I am is not just a phrase, it is the creative principle of existence itself. When you speak these words with complete conviction and feeling, when you assume the state of consciousness they represent, when you live from the assumption that they are true, you activate the same creative power that brings universes into being. The question is not whether you have this power, you have been using it all your life. The question is whether you will use it consciously to create what you desire or unconsciously to create what you fear. The choice is yours and the time is now. Your awakening to the creative power of consciousness is not just about improving your personal circumstances, it is about participating in the evolution of human consciousness itself. Every time you successfully assume a desired state into being, you contribute to the collective awakening of humanity. Every time you prove that consciousness creates reality, you help to establish a new paradigm for human existence. The revolution of consciousness has already begun. The question is not whether it will succeed, it is whether you will participate in it. Will you remain asleep in the assumption of limitation, or will you awaken to your infinite creative power? Will you continue to use I am unconsciously to create more of what you don't want, or will you begin to use it consciously to create the life of your dreams? The choice is yours, and in making this choice, you will discover that you are not just changing your own life, you are changing the world. For in a universe where consciousness is the creative power, every individual awakening contributes to the awakening of the whole. Every person who learns to assume their desires into being becomes a beacon of possibility for others who are still trapped in the assumption of limitation. This is the ultimate truth that desperate man discovered in Barbados in 1905, the truth that transformed his life and the lives of countless others who heard his message. You are not a victim of circumstances, you are the creator of circumstances. You are not at the mercy of external forces, you are the director of external forces. You are not limited by what appears to be possible, you are only limited by what you assume to be possible. The power to transform your life completely lies in your hands right now. The secret is not complex, it is beautifully simple. The two words that can change everything are I am. Use them wisely, feel them deeply, and watch as your entire reality transforms to match your assumption. The life you have always dreamed of living is not a distant possibility. It is an immediate reality waiting for you to assume it into being. These were practical instructions for conscious creation, techniques for assuming states of consciousness that would inevitably manifest as external conditions. The ancient masters understood something that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. Consciousness is not produced by the brain, but rather the brain is produced by consciousness. The external world is not separate from the internal world. It is the internal world made visible. But why was this knowledge hidden? Why were these teachings reserved for initiates who underwent years of preparation before receiving the deepest secrets? The answer reveals something disturbing about human nature and the structure of power itself. Knowledge is power, and power shared is power diminished. The ancient priesthoods, like the modern elite, understood that their authority depended upon the ignorance of the masses. If everyone knew they were the god of their own experience, if everyone realized they could assume any state of consciousness and make it manifest, there would be no need for intermediaries, no need for external authorities, no need for the complex hierarchies that keep some people in positions of power while others remain in positions of servitude. The Hermetic tradition, which influenced everything from early Christianity to modern psychology, taught that the universe operates according to mental laws. As above, so below was not poetry, it was a precise description of how consciousness creates reality. The macrocosm of the universe and the microcosm of individual experience operate according to the same principles. Change your inner world and your outer world must change to match it. The Gnostics, who were systematically persecuted and eliminated by the early church, taught that the kingdom of heaven is within you, not as a metaphor, but as a literal description of the creative power of consciousness. Hay understood that the external world is a projection of internal states, and that salvation comes not through external saviors, but through the recognition of your own divine nature. These traditions were not eliminated because they were false. They were eliminated because they were true, and their truth was too dangerous for existing power structures to tolerate. The message that every individual is the creator of their own experience threatens every institution that depends upon convincing people they are victims of circumstances beyond their control. The medieval alchemists, working in secret to avoid persecution, developed an elaborate symbolic language to hide their real work. They weren't trying to turn lead into gold. They were teaching the transformation of human consciousness from states of limitation to states of abundance. The base metal of ordinary consciousness had to be refined through the fire of assumption until it became the gold of realized desire. When you understand that these ancient teachings were describing the same psychological principles that govern every successful manifestation, you begin to see why this knowledge has been systematically suppressed. The truth is too simple, too powerful, and too accessible to be allowed into general circulation. It threatens the very foundations of a society built upon the assumption that most people are powerless to change their circumstances. The modern scientific revolution, which began in the 17th century, marked the beginning of a new kind of suppression. Instead of hiding the truth in mystery schools, the new approach was to declare consciousness itself an illusion, a mere byproduct of mechanical brain processes. Matter was declared the fundamental reality, and consciousness was reduced to a secondary phenomenon with no creative power. This materialistic worldview, which still dominates mainstream science and education, serves the same function as the ancient mystery schools. It keeps the masses ignorant of their creative power. By convincing people that they are nothing more than biological machines responding to external stimuli, the materialistic paradigm ensures that most people never discover their ability to consciously create their reality. But the truth cannot be suppressed forever. Even mainstream science is beginning to discover what the ancient mystics knew all along. Consciousness plays a fundamental role in creating reality. The observer effect in quantum physics, the placebo effect in medicine, the power of belief to alter physical conditions, all of these phenomena point to the same conclusion that the ancients taught thousands of years ago. The field of neuroplasticity has revolutionized our understanding of the brain's ability to rewire itself based on mental activity. What you consistently think about, what you repeatedly assume to be true, literally changes the structure of your brain. The ancient teaching that as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he, has been validated by modern neuroscience. Your brain cannot distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. When you assume a state of consciousness, when you feel yourself to be the person you want to become, your brain begins to build the neural pathways that will make that assumption a reality. This is not metaphysics. This is measurable, observable science. The reticular activating system, a network of neurons in your brainstem, acts as a filter for incoming information. It determines what you notice and what you ignore, what opportunities you see and what obstacles seem insurmountable. When you assume a state of wealth, your reticular activating system begins to filter reality in a way that makes wealth-building opportunities visible and accessible. This is why the wealthy seem to have so many lucky breaks, while the poor seem to face constant obstacles. It's not that the universe favors some people over others. It's that different assumptions create different perceptual filters, which in turn create different experiences of reality. Confirmation bias, which psychologists have identified as one of the most powerful forces shaping human perception, ensures that you will find evidence to support whatever you assume to be true about yourself and your circumstances. If you assume you are unlucky, you will notice every piece of evidence that confirms your unluckiness, while ignoring evidence to the contrary. If you assume you are blessed, you will notice every piece of evidence that confirms your blessedness, while dismissing apparent setbacks as temporary inconveniences. The placebo effect demonstrates that belief alone can trigger measurable physiological changes. When patients believe they are receiving powerful medicine, their bodies often respond as if they actually are receiving that medicine. Their assumptions about their healing literally create the conditions for healing to occur. This same principle operates in every area of life. Your assumptions about your financial capacity, your relationship potential, your creative abilities, your health prospects, all of these assumptions create the psychological and neurological conditions that make their fulfillment more or less likely. The emerging field of epigenetics has shown that your thoughts and emotions can actually alter the expression of your genes. The assumption that you are genetically doomed to certain conditions or limited to certain possibilities is being challenged by research showing that consciousness can override genetic programming. Mirror neurons, which fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing that action, explain why assuming the feeling of your wish fulfilled can create the same neural patterns as actually having achieved your desire. When you genuinely feel yourself to be wealthy, your brain creates the same neural patterns that exist in people who are actually wealthy. The psychological principle of cognitive dissonance explains why persistent assumption must eventually manifest as external change. Your mind cannot tolerate the discomfort of believing one thing while experiencing another. If you consistently assume a state of prosperity while experiencing poverty, your mind will work to resolve this dissonance by creating conditions that match your assumption. These scientific discoveries are not separate from the ancient mystical teachings. They are the modern language for describing the same fundamental truth. Consciousness is not passive, it is creative. Your assumptions about reality don't just describe your experience, they create it. The internal world of thought and feeling is not separate from the external world of form and circumstance. It is the cause of which the external world is the effect. When you understand this principle, you begin to see why the wealthy remain wealthy and the poor remain poor. It's not because of external circumstances or genetic advantages or lucky breaks. It's because wealth and poverty are states of consciousness that perpetuate themselves through the psychological mechanisms that science is only now beginning to understand. The two words that changed everything for that desperate man in Barbados in 1905 are the same two words that every successful person has used, consciously or unconsciously, to create their reality. These words are not magical, they are psychological. They are not mystical, they are scientific. They are the fundamental creative principle of consciousness itself, operating according to laws as precise and predictable as the laws of physics. The revelation that transformed that desperate man's life, the secret that the ancients guarded so carefully, the principle that modern science validates without fully understanding, it all comes down to two simple words that you speak every day without recognizing their creative power. These words are, I am. But before you dismiss this as too simple, too obvious, or too good to be true, understand that the simplicity of truth is precisely what makes it so powerful and so dangerous to existing power structures. The words I am are not just descriptive, they are creative. They are not just statements about your current condition, they are declarations that shape your future reality. When you say I am broke, you are not simply describing your financial situation. You are assuming the state of consciousness that creates and perpetuates financial limitation. When you say I am unlucky, you are not just commenting on your circumstances. You are activating the psychological mechanisms that ensure more unlucky experiences will come your way. The power of I am lies not in the words themselves, but in the feeling state they invoke and the assumptions they reinforce. Every time you complete the sentence I am, you are making a fundamental declaration about the nature of your reality. You are telling your subconscious mind, your reticular activating system, and the creative forces of your consciousness what to create more of in your experience. Most people use these words unconsciously, carelessly, and destructively. They say, I am tired, I am confused, I am struggling, I am unlucky, and then wonder why their lives seem to be filled with tiredness, confusion, struggle, and bad luck. They don't realize that they are using the most powerful creative force in the universe, their own consciousness, to create the very conditions they claim to want to escape. The wealthy, the successful, the influential, they use these same words, but they complete the sentence differently. They say, I am blessed, I am capable, I am resourceful, I am destined for success. They don't say these things because they are wealthy. They are wealthy because they consistently say and feel these things. But the real power of I am is not in positive affirmations or wishful thinking. The real power lies in assuming the feeling of the state you desire and maintaining that assumption until it hardens into fact. This is what the ancient mystics meant when they spoke of the creative power of divine consciousness. This is what modern psychology describes when it explains how identity shapes behavior and perception. When you say, "I am wealthy," and actually feel the truth of that statement, when you assume the psychological state of wealth consciousness, you activate every mechanism in your being that creates wealth. Your thoughts change, your emotions change, your behavior changes, your perception changes, and your external circumstances must change to match your internal assumption. This is not about pretending or visualizing or hoping. This is about assuming a state of consciousness so completely that it becomes your natural way of being. When you truly assume "I am wealthy," you don't think like a poor person trying to become rich. You think like a wealthy person who happens to be temporarily inconvenienced by apparent financial limitations. The feeling is the secret. You can repeat "I am wealthy" 1,000 times, but if you don't feel wealthy, if you don't assume the consciousness of wealth, if you don't live from the assumption that wealth is your natural state, then you are simply engaging in empty repetition. The words without the feeling are powerless. The feeling without the words is powerful. The words combined with the feeling create miracles. This is why the ancients taught that God's name is "I am that I am." They understood that consciousness itself is the creative principle of existence, and that individual consciousness, when it assumes any state, becomes that state in manifestation. When you say "I am wealthy" with complete conviction and feeling, you are using the same creative power that brought the universe into existence. The neurological research confirms what the mystics always knew. When you assume a state of consciousness, your brain immediately begins to create the neural pathways that will make that state your reality. The thoughts you think, the emotions you feel, the actions you take, the opportunities you notice, all of them align with your assumption. Your entire being reorganizes itself around the state you have assumed. But here's what most people don't understand. You don't have to wait for external circumstances to change before you can assume the state you desire. You can assume the state right now, regardless of what your current circumstances seem to be telling you. The external world is not the cause of your internal state. It is the effect of your internal state. When you truly grasp this principle, when you understand that "I am" is the creative power of consciousness itself, you realize that you have been using this power all along. The question is not whether you have the power to create your reality. You are creating it right now with every "I am" statement you make. The question is whether you will use this power consciously and deliberately, or whether you will continue to use it unconsciously and destructively. The transformation begins the moment you take conscious control of what follows "I am" in your thoughts, your words, and most importantly, your feeling states. This is not positive thinking. This is conscious creation. This is not self-deception. This is self-determination. This is not fantasy. This is the fundamental mechanics of how consciousness creates reality. Now that you understand the creative power of "I am," you must also understand why you have been systematically programmed to use this power against yourself. The conditioning that keeps most people trapped in limitation is not accidental. It is deliberate, pervasive, and extremely sophisticated. From the moment you were born, you have been surrounded by messages designed to make you assume states of limitation, scarcity, and powerlessness. The media you consume, the education you receive, the cultural narratives you absorb, all of them serve to program your consciousness with assumptions that keep you trapped in cycles of lack and struggle. Consider the messages that bombard you daily through news media. The economy is terrible. Jobs are scarce. The rich are getting richer while the poor get poorer. Times are tough. You have to work hard for money. Money doesn't grow on trees. You can't have everything you want. Every one of these messages is designed to make you assume states of consciousness that create scarcity and limitation. The entertainment industry reinforces these assumptions through stories that glorify struggle and suffering while portraying wealth as either unattainable or corrupting. The poor are portrayed as noble and virtuous, while the wealthy are depicted as evil and greedy. These narratives program your subconscious mind to associate wealth with guilt and poverty with virtue, ensuring that you will unconsciously sabotage any attempt to improve your financial condition. The education system, rather than teaching you about the creative power of consciousness, teaches you to be a good employee, a compliant consumer, and an obedient citizen. You are taught to follow instructions, not to question authority, and to accept limitations as facts rather than assumptions. You are trained to believe that your circumstances are determined by forces outside your control, and that your role is to adapt to these circumstances rather than to create new ones. Religious institutions, which should be teaching you about your divine creative power, instead teach you to be humble, to accept your lot in life, and to wait for external salvation. You are taught that wanting more is greedy, that prosperity is suspicious, and that spiritual people should be content with less. These teachings ensure that you will assume states of consciousness that repel abundance rather than attract it. The consumer culture creates a psychological double bind that keeps you trapped in scarcity consciousness. On one hand, you are constantly exposed to images of luxury and abundance that create desire. On the other hand, you are taught that these things are only for other people, that you don't deserve them, or that you can't afford them. This creates a state of constant wanting combined with constant assumption of lack, the perfect formula for perpetual dissatisfaction. Social media amplifies these effects by creating constant comparison with others. You see curated images of other people's success and happiness while comparing them to your unfiltered reality. This creates feelings of inadequacy, envy, and limitation that reinforce assumptions of scarcity and unworthiness. The financial system itself is designed to keep you trapped in cycles of debt and dependency. You are taught to live beyond your means, to buy things you don't need with money you don't have, and to assume that debt is normal and necessary. Credit cards, loans, and mortgages are presented as solutions to financial problems when they are actually designed to create financial dependency. The workplace culture reinforces assumptions of powerlessness and limitation. You are taught to trade your time for money, to accept whatever salary is offered, and to be grateful for any job regardless of how it makes you feel. The very concept of employment is based on the assumption that you are not capable of creating value independently and that you need someone else to provide you with opportunities. Even well-meaning advice from family and friends often reinforces limiting assumptions. Be realistic. Don't get your hopes up. Money doesn't buy happiness. You have to work hard for everything you get. Life isn't fair. These messages, delivered by people who love you and want to protect you from disappointment, actually program your consciousness with assumptions that guarantee disappointment. The cumulative effect of all this conditioning is that most people spend their entire lives assuming states of consciousness that create the very limitations they claim to want to escape. They say, "I am struggling," and then wonder why they keep struggling. They say, "I am broke," and then wonder why money seems to avoid them. They say, "I am unlucky," and then wonder why bad things keep happening to them. This conditioning is so pervasive and so subtle that most people never realize they are being programmed. They think their limiting beliefs are based on objective reality, when in fact they are based on assumptions that have been carefully planted in their consciousness by systems that benefit from their limitation. The truth is that scarcity is not a natural condition, it is a manufactured condition. Limitation is not a fact of life, it is an assumption about life. The resources exist for everyone to live abundantly, but the distribution of those resources is controlled by systems that depend upon the majority of people assuming they don't deserve abundance. When you begin to see through this conditioning, when you recognize how systematically you have been programmed to assume states of limitation, you can begin to take conscious control of your assumptions. You can begin to use "I am" statements that create abundance instead of scarcity, possibility instead of limitation, and empowerment instead of victimhood. The irony is that while the masses are being systematically conditioned to assume states of scarcity and limitation, there exists a small group of people who use the same creative principles to maintain and expand their wealth and power. These people may not speak in mystical terms, they may not understand the metaphysical principles involved, but they intuitively use the power of assumption to create extraordinary success. Study the ultra-wealthy, and you will discover that they share certain assumptions about themselves in reality that are completely different from the assumptions held by the middle class and the poor. They assume they deserve success. They assume opportunities will come their way. They assume they are capable of creating value. They assume they are blessed and favored by life itself. These assumptions are not conscious philosophical positions. They are unconscious psychological patterns that shape everything these people think, feel, and do. A billionaire doesn't wake up in the morning and think, "I wonder if I can afford this." A billionaire assumes affordability. A billionaire doesn't wonder if they deserve success. They assume they deserve it. This is not because they are inherently different from other people. It's because they have internalized assumptions about themselves and reality that automatically create wealth-building thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Their identity is aligned with abundance, and their reality reflects their identity. Most wealthy people inherited these assumptions from their families, their social circles, or their early experiences. They grew up hearing, "We can afford it, we deserve the best, money comes easily to us, We are blessed. These messages became the foundation of their consciousness, and their consciousness became the foundation of their reality. The middle class, by contrast, grew up hearing mixed messages about money. They were taught to want more, but also to feel guilty about having more. They were encouraged to work hard, but also warned not to expect too much. They were told money is important, but also that money isn't everything. These contradictory messages create contradictory assumptions, which create contradictory results. Enough success to avoid poverty, but not enough success to achieve real wealth. The poor grew up hearing that money is scarce, that rich people are greedy, that you have to work hard for everything you get, and that wanting more is selfish. These messages became assumptions, and these assumptions became their reality. The wealthy elite understand, at least unconsciously, that identity precedes reality. They don't see themselves as people trying to become successful. They see themselves as successful people who happen to be expanding their success. They don't hope for good things to happen. They expect good things to happen because good things happening is consistent with their identity. This is why wealthy people often seem to have incredible luck. They notice opportunities that others miss because their assumptions predispose them to see opportunities. They take risks that others avoid because their assumptions make those risks seem reasonable. They persist through challenges that would defeat others because their assumptions make temporary setbacks seem irrelevant to their ultimate success. The wealthy also understand the power of association. They surround themselves with other successful people, not primarily for networking purposes, but because being around success reinforces their assumptions about their own success. They live in environments that reflect their identity, wear clothes that reflect their identity, and engage in activities that reflect their identity. What most people don't realize is that all of these behaviors and circumstances are effects, not causes.